We knew at the outset that this is cricket. It's not something you can mess with. It is our religion. People will be well annoyed if you go wrong anywhere.
So, Supriya, can you take us through your journey as a filmmaker? How has it been for you? What motivated you to join this field and just go ahead with it?
So I'm a first generation filmmaker. I come from a business family, but this is something I carved for myself, and I'm very happy that I did, I would say. It all started out when I was very young in college. I used to watch this program on the BBC called Hard Talk. It was an investigative program with an anchor by the name Tim Sebastian, who was a very hard-hitting presenter who would grill very powerful people, political, from all walks of life, political, sport, anywhere and everywhere. But, he was an investigative journalist and he'd be doing these one-on-one interviews. And I used to watch that growing up with my father. And at that point, I had this little I had a thought that I want to be an investigative journalist. So I pursued this desire and I pursued it to the fullest. I went on to study in London at journalism school. I went to the University of Westminster. This was all at a time where my parents were wondering, why does she want to study journalism? We've got everything laid out for her. She can very easily just dive into the family setup and it's all there. But I had this fire in my belly to be a journalist. And so I pursued that dream by first studying journalism. But I was also very lucky because in my first year of university, there were some people who were down from the BBC, believe it or not. This Hard Talk that I used to watch was on the BBC. And turns out, this team was down from the BBC at my university campus the first year that I'm in college, talking about a new radio station that they were launching. And that happened to be the BBC Asian network, because of course, England, the UK has a big British Asian diaspora, Indians, Pakistanis, Bangladeshis. And so they were looking for somebody who could join that radio station and be a part of it. They just come sort of recruiting, looking out for anyone who might be interested at that point. And I hadn't heard of this myself, but a friend of mine had found out this had happened, and she'd applied. And so she got the job. She reached out to them and she got the job. It was a job where we would answer the phones on a radio show. So in England, there's talk radio. So, there's a debate going on and people are discussing something and you can phone in. And so the job was to get somebody who would be willing to answer the phones. And so that's really where it began for me. Through my friend, I got the contact and I kept nudging somebody and I would call them every day for about 6 months and say, can I come and meet you? I was this annoying Indian student who really wanted to work with the BBC. And so after many months, I got my foot in the door and landed myself the job with the BBC, which was a dream job, right? This is what dreams are made of. You've gone from India as a student, study journalism because you want to be like somebody you've watched on the BBC, and there you are, working at the BBC. It was an institution. It still is an institution. And so, that really was my foundation. I started off on that radio show. And over the years, I grew within that team from answering the phones to becoming an assistant to becoming a producer. I was Indian. So, of course, I had great access to Indian stories that a lot of my colleagues didn't, because I had contacts here and I could come up with new story ideas, all those sorts of things. And really that's where it took off for me. So I was a journalist with the BBC for a long time, and then I started working with another news channel called Al Jazeera English. And I must have done that for about 10 years. I went on to do a master's at the London School of Economics, also in media regulation and policy making. I thought maybe I should take it up a notch and look at media law, not just journalism, but maybe look at law and the legal side of things. But at that point, I was so embedded in work and being a journalist that, that my career just took off from there, from being a freelance journalist. And then I remember it was in 2009, after having probably lived in the UK for 10 years, when it was the Indian elections in 2009, Al Jazeera wanted an Indian crew. And I thought this is my best chance to move back and do whatever I can. And kind of, because I had that edge in the network, I thought, okay, this is my chance to tell stories from India. And so I moved back to India in 2009. And I continued working freelance with Al Jazeera, with the BBC, with a bunch of other international news networks. And from then on, I set up my company. And now we're Mao Productions, which is media on wheels. And we tell stories from India. We tell stories to the globe that are specifically of human interest, of public interest. And that's what we've done, is we're rooted in the craft of nonfiction stories and telling real people stories and bringing them to life. So that's really my story in a nutshell. From being a journalist, a journalism student, to now having my own company. That was really my trajectory over the last 10, 15 years.
That's very inspiring to hear. And while you were sharing these things, it I just happened to think that it's a very challenging and a very diverse sort of a field that you have worked with. What are
Yeah.
the things that inspired you? I mean, the filmmakers that particularly inspired you to stick to it and go forward and just do this job in your filmmaking and just come up with your organization?
More than individuals and filmmakers, I would say it's what journalism actually does, speaking truth to power, bringing stories to life, telling stories of human interest, because it connects. Anything which has emotion connects all of us. There are a lot of topics that are of public interest that impact all of us. And I feel like good journalism has the ability to make a great impact, on various fronts. And that's what it is, that drive to be able to make social impact, to be able to make a difference with a story that you're able to tell through these platforms that have a diverse audience, not just in the country, but outside, a global audience. Because now the world's your oyster, it's a really small place. The internet's made it really small. I just feel like being able to tell and bringing these stories to life is what drives me to do what I do.
Absolutely. And what prompted you to make Caught Out, and why did you find this story that has to be told to the world?
So, Caught Out is a retrospective film. It looks at events that happened more than 20 years ago. And the reason why I picked this story and I wanted to tell this story is because, I'm a kid of the 80s, and I, grew up in the 80s and the 90s in India. This is a time when we didn't have too much television. The only TV we used to watch, I remember when we were younger, was Doordarshan and Mowgli. Jungle Book is what we used to kind of, Mahabharat, Ramayana, Jungle Book. These were the things we used to watch on TV. And then gradually in the 90s, we started watching films. We had, television was beaming cricket matches, because of all the changes that had happened, satellite TV coming in. So this was a time when your cricketers and your Bollywood stars were your heroes. These were your role models. You had no other. And so we all, I mean, anyone who kind of grew up in that era grew up on a diet of that. And in my house, cricket was always on television. So whether I wanted to watch a match or not, I always knew what was happening by default. And I know a lot of people would agree, because, cricket is a religion. It really is a part of our DNA. And so, it was passive viewing, if call it that, but it was there. And so we know in 2000, there was a dark period. And something had happened in cricket that shook all of us. And we sort of lost faith in the game. We started saying, "Ye to match fixed hai." All these murmurs started. And so there is this dark period to this history of cricket. And we wanted to shine light on that dark period and tell people exactly what had happened, because we knew there were match fixing allegations. We also knew subsequently everybody was cleared, but we don't know the finer details of what happened. And that's what Caught Out seeks to do. It is a deep dive into this investigation that unearths, what happened as part of that match fixing scandal in 2000.
What was the kind of research that went for it, and were there any some challenges that you had to go through while shooting for it, or just taking for some permissions, or just if you have to show this particular information or not?
Yeah. So, we knew at the outset that this is cricket. It's not something you can mess with. It is our religion. People will be well annoyed if you go wrong anywhere. And there will be brickbats. And so, we made sure there was no room for error, that we would work with a lot of due diligence. We do our research, which involved speaking to as many people possible from across the board, whether they were journalists, whether they were writers, whether they were cricket commentators, whether they were cricketers even, or the investigators. We spoke to probably each and every stakeholder kind of, camp involved to get a rounded understanding of what the story is going to be. And then we had to work on earning their trust for us to be able to tell their story. Because, as you understand, it's not just the cricketers, but it's also your investigators in this story who I feel are the real heroes, because they did what they did 20 years ago, which is told people the dark truth, the truth that people probably didn't want to know or hear, knew happens, but didn't want a whiff of. So they did it then, and they were going to do it again. 20 years later, they were going to break that bad news again and kind of, rake the mud and tell us what had happened. And so to earn their trust was another level and layer that we had to peel and work on. I'd also say, thirdly, archive material in India, to kind of dig out old clips is not a very easy task. So we started on that journey very early on, probably a year and a half before the film came out, to just find the best clips that we could potentially get our hands on, because we wanted to make sure that voices are represented well in the film, and that you hear from both sides. So although, 20 years ago as well, we saw that cricketers maintained a conspiracy of silence. This is how it's reported in the CBI report as well, is that the cricketers were not willing to come out with, what had happened in about the match fixing episode. It's pretty much the case now. There is a conspiracy of silence. So unfortunately, we don't really have your top level of cricketers talking to us about it. But we did the next best thing possible, is speak to people around them who would be comfortable enough to tell us their side of the story. And that's where you see perhaps, Mohammad Azharuddin's lawyer, who also spoke to us, because he knew exactly the finer details of the case, and we wanted to give him a voice. So really, those were the challenges that we had to face. Not to say production wise, this was a co-production that we did with a company in the UK, which is an Academy Award winning company that is known for telling great stories in the sports domain. And so just having them with us helped us get sort of lend credibility to the entire project and get the right contributors on board to tell their story. And also the fact that it was COVID. We were doing this film, making this film in the thick of COVID. So crews had to be assembled, quickly dismantled and sent back. We had to constantly make sure people are doing fine and can carry on with the shooting schedule. And lastly, I was pregnant while we were filming this. So that was another big one. And I was pregnant with twins, so there were a lot of levels of check involved, both from Netflix, my production partners, to make sure that we follow everything to the T, and that health and safety is adhered to in the process of making this film.
Okay. But the things that happened, did you find some information regarding cricket or any such kind of a scoop, if you would say, in a journalism linguistic? Did you find any such information that you had never heard of it before, or the world doesn't know about it?
I mean, you always find stories when you're on the ground, right? You always unearth stories, but you can only put them out there if they're verified and you can corroborate them. And that's where good journalistic skills come into play. And that's what we've had to deploy in this film. So really what you see is all factual information, that is known to us, that somewhere in the public domain. We may not have known the finer details of how things unraveled, what happened when an XYZ player went into the CBI, how the bookie MK Gupta was found, and how he came to speak to the CBI and the investigators. All these finer details are things that haven't been fleshed out. So that was something that was, something we understood firsthand from the investigators, from the journalists. A lot of the other stuff that we found is perhaps for ourselves and will go to the grave unless there is evidence of it with which we can kind of back it up and share with you.
All right. We'll wait for those confirmations.
Of course. Of course. I mean, that will be another rattle to the world of cricket, if at all, so yeah.
And if I were to ask any 3 female filmmakers who inspire you on a daily basis, who would that be?
3 female filmmakers who inspire me, and I will stick with India because there is so much inspiration um, in our country itself. Why look outside when there's so much happening here? Let's start with somebody who's most topical. I'd say Guneet Manga, because she's known to be a hustler. She has worked her way up in the industry. She's kind of been doing this for a long time. She's knocked on many doors, and she's now finally tasting success. And she's sort of soaking it all in because she's earned it. She's basking in all that glory that she's earned. So definitely I'd say Guneet Monga, although even though she's a producer, more often than not in our field of work, producers don't get talked about. It's usually the director that we shine the spotlight in. And I say this because I've been a producer myself, where I've worked incredibly hard to tell a story, just as much as a director and alongside a director. And that doesn't get noticed. So I'd say Guneet Manga, despite the fact that she's a producer. I'd say Nandita Das, for the sort of films that she brings out. They have that story of human interest, which impacts each one of us. That emotion can really seep through, and it's so relatable. So I think it's a time where we need to tell relatable stories that can move us. So I definitely say Nandita Das is somebody. And Zoya Akhtar, she brings an element of spunk. She's able to capture what's happening in contemporary India and bring it out to the audience in a way that you think, whoa, this could not have been put any better. And I think she's been able to do that with Gully Boy and a bunch of her films. It really is a mirror on society. So I'd say these three are a great inspiration in that sense.
Absolutely. All three are phenomenal. And so are you.
Very kind. Long way off, Nihal. We're just starting.
Yes. And if I would like to know more about your upcoming projects, what would that be?
So it's a little bit of a secret, but I will say that it's a film which is driven by females. It's again like this one. It's got a female director producer duo helming it, but it's also a story on another woman, a very powerful woman, a woman of substance, because we feel there's underrepresentation of women in film. We know that, but that's changing, and we want to be part of that change. And we want to be able to take control of our own narrative, our own stories, and be able to tell the world what it is and do it our way. So here's a team of women telling a really solid story on a woman the way it needs to be told, with all that gusto and might and truth and everything, all that passion that we can throw into it, to be as true to ourselves as possible.
So this will also
I think
be
it's high time we sort of stop crying about, oh, we don't get a chance to do this and we don't have a platform to do this. You've got to carve your own niche, and you've got to make your own journey, your own road, and that's what we're trying to do with this one.
So this will also be a documentary, or
it's a documentary series that we're looking at.
Documentary series. Okay.
Yes.
And any particular field that you will be focusing through this?
Well, it's just about women today, so it's very much a contemporary issue, and sort of a reflection on women of substance, and how they conduct themselves in modern India.
And this will be on OTT?
Taking control of our own narrative.
This will be on OTT?
Yes, this will be for an OTT platform.
Okay, Netflix or some other platform.
Yeah, I mean, we can't disclose that at the moment. But it will be for one of the big OTT giants, a global one. I can tell you that.
Okay. While speaking on OTT, what is your take on OTT? I mean, how has it changed the narrative of content consumption in the Indian consumers?
I think OTTs are serving a diverse audience. It's really tricky because you're trying to appease a wide section of society, which can't be easy. So I feel like it's a hit and miss, but we're on the path of experimenting and putting out content which doesn't necessarily dumb down the audience, because the Indian audience now is quite with it and knows what they want. They have access to what's available globally, and I think your streamers are catering to that, as well as a local audience that wants a bit of masala, that wants story which have more of an entertaining twist. So I think it's a mixed bag. I honestly feel like, even when we pitch ideas, we're not quite sure what it is that is going to tickle or pique their interest. But we personally are committed to the craft of nonfiction and telling real people stories and real event stories, because we feel there's so much just there. The Indian audience, it's a welcoming change. We want to move away from kind of just the drama, and there is a space for telling real people stories, real hero stories. So that's what we're trying to cultivate with the work that we do, and we hope it's sort of reciprocal, but it's all going to depend on what the audience does. And I suppose, with streamers now coming in, our level of production has gotten better. So we're competing at the global stage for the products that we put out. And I think we're doing a good job of that.
All right, that was all with the questions. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Nehal. Nice to talk to you.
Thank you. Same here.